Good evening, friends, and welcome to a Friday Night Live with Crime Time with DutyRon and Melanie Little. I'm a retired New York City police detective, and if you like all things true crime related from the police detective's perspective, and now from a lawyer's perspective, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you get all things DutyRon and Melanie Little when we go live or upload another video. Tonight, we're going to be talking, again, this is 2 nights in a row, Richard Allen. This is the defendant who stands charged with the murders of Abby and Libby from the Delphi, Indiana murders. Guys and girls, again, if you're not yet subscribed, consider hitting that subscribe button. And I want to say a special thank you before Melanie and I get into this to our replay viewers and the folks who leave super thanks. I always forget to thank you guys because people who watch the replay and then leave like a super thanks, it's like a super chat. You guys are the unsung heroes, and I appreciate you for doing that. You leave such great comments, and to everyone who is engaged by leaving comments and concerns and questions, we greatly appreciate it. Melanie, how you doing on a Friday night? And thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's Friday. Happy Friday, everyone. To everybody in the chat, thanks so much for showing up tonight and spending your Friday evening with us. But like Ron said, subscribe. It's free. It's free.
Yeah.
All you got to do is hit that little bell, hit the like button. It really helps us. So if you would be so kind to do that, that would be great. And we do love reading your comments on the replay, and we do actually respond to your comments a lot of the time. So please feel free to comment, question. We're here.
And you know, Melanie, last night I went live at around 10:15. I was pajama ready and ready to go to bed, but so many people sent in questions and concerns into Crime Time with DutyRon and the website. I felt it was important to go live. So I did a basic overview of this hearing that was Thursday with Richard Allen. You know, a lot of people feel like they either got their guy or got the wrong guy. So we have, you know, it's the same situation that we have going on with Brian Kohlberger in the Idaho 4. You know, there's gag orders in place, Mel. There's the suppression of the probable cause affidavit. Heck, we don't even know how definitively how Libby and Abby were murdered.
We don't know the cause of death or the manner of death.
Right.
Which is unusual.
So I wanted to just play a little clip for some of the folks, and by a show of hands here in the chat, just let us know how many of you have been following this case. This has been ongoing for many, many years.
2017.
February 13th, 2017. So if you've been following this case, put a 1 in the chat. If you haven't and you're not really up to speed on it, put a 2. I really like to know how many people who are watching here knows what's going on in this case. If you don't, we're going to get into the confession, these 5 or 6 confessions allegedly that he has been throwing out. We're not sure if it was to the warden via a letter, to inmates, to prison guards, to friends and family, because he can get visitors. I verified and double checked that. His family can come visit him. His lawyers can come visit him. And I confirmed that before we went live. So, you know, we don't know who he's saying this to because everything is pretty vague. And we're just relying on sources.
A blanket statement in court that there were confessions made. We don't know who he made them to, how he made them, in what manner. We really don't know much, but we're going to get into it.
Yeah. So let's get this rolling so people can see what we're talking about and what this live interactive broadcast is going to be about. And again, hold your questions towards the end. If you have questions, hashtag Melanie, hashtag DutyRon. And when Anthony from Tier Talk, he's going to join us in the second half of it, you know, put hashtag Anthony in the chat. He's going to talk about care and custody. He's a corrections expert and an executive in the corrections field. He's been on the channel many, many a time. So Anthony will be joining us at the 10 o'clock hour. All right, here we go, folks.
A trial date is now set for the suspect in the Delphi murders.
The man accused of murdering Abby Williams and Libby German will face a jury in about 6.5 months. Richard Allen was in court for nearly 5 hours today.
And our news crews were in the courtroom all day as well. That includes 13 Investigates senior reporter Bob Siegel.
He begins our live team coverage tonight from Carroll County. Bob.
Well, we We now know Richard Allen's trial date is set for January. Judge Fran Gohl set jury selection for January 8th, 2024, and we are told we expect 3 weeks for the trial. Now, we also heard a bombshell in court today. Carroll County prosecutor Nick McLeland said that Richard Allen has made incriminating statements while he's being held in prison awaiting his trial. McLeland said Allen, and I quote, confessed 5 or 6 times to killing the girls. He didn't give any more details other than that. Allen's defense attorney told the judge the statements that were allegedly made by the defendant were generic. And he said, quote, the jury's going to hear all about that when the time is right. So the other big news that happened in court today is actually what did not happen in court. We expected the judge to hold a suppression hearing on whether to allow ballistics evidence in the case and whether that's going to be admissible. That did not happen. According to the state, they have tests that link an unfired bullet at the crime scene to a gun found in Allen's house. The defense wants the evidence thrown out, saying that it's based on questionable evidence. The judge announced that she is going to hold a hearing on that at a later date. We don't know that yet. So most of today's hearing focused on another very important issue, whether Richard Allen is going to remain in a maximum security state prison or move closer here to Carroll County. Samantha Johnson was in court sitting right next to me today. She heard all the testimony. And what we heard, well, first of all, it lasted hours. And it was fascinating.
It was fascinating. And as a reminder, this all comes about because the defense is saying right now that Allen's mental and physical health is deteriorating because he's in this maximum security unit. I've had the privilege of seeing Allen every time he's been in hearings yet this year. And we know, apparently, according to just the conditions that we've seen over the past few months, the words I wrote down to describe him today were weak and shallow feeling, also giving off a timid expression as well. But today we know that both sides agreed that this original safekeeping order that was filed in November of last year, we know that they say that was based on potential threats. The exact words they used were speculative safety concerns. And the sheriff at the time says he was being proactive by asking that Allen be moved out of Carroll County. Witnesses today testified, though, that there was no threat at the time, nor have there been any direct threats to Richard Allen. However, we did hear from the Westville warden today who said that he would be concerned for Richard Allen's safety if he were moved out of this maximum security unit. In fact, we know that we heard from another Westville worker today who said that in his 5 years of working at this prison, that Richard Allen is the only pre-trial inmate they've ever had in this segregation maximum security unit. So the defense today is arguing that this is all about equal protection. They told us in court today that their goal is really to come up with a solution to get better access to Allen, to help him prepare for this defense. They even offered other options potentially to house Allen. We know Cass County was one of the counties being mentioned. We heard from their sheriff today. Hours of back and forth debate on this. And then, of course, Judge Gohl deciding that she was going to take both sides of this argument under advisement. No decision today, but of course, we do expect more in the coming days or coming weeks.
And a lot of what we heard in court today focused on Richard Allen's poor health. Yeah. And so we certainly want to explain more about that. And coming up at 5:30, we're going to explain why Richard Allen is now under video surveillance 24 hours a day. That came out in court today. That's coming up just in a little bit here at 5:30.
All right, before we let you go right now at 5, guys, obviously so many people are focused on this trial. We know it was a packed courtroom for people who wanted to see it in person today. Can you share who was there?
Yeah, the line was out the door early this morning. The first people in line to make sure they had a spot inside the courtroom arrived around 5:20. A lot of interest in this case, as you mentioned. We do know the families were there again today. We saw both the families of Abby and Libby. In fact, we saw more family members, I would say, than the last time we were here in Carroll County. It is important to mention we also saw family members of Richard Allen. So it was a full courtroom from what we're told. There were no empty seats available when we were in there earlier today. So a lot of emotion, of course, a lot of anticipation as to what comes next. And I know John Duran's going to walk through that coming up at 6 o'clock.
So there you have it, Mel. Melanie, there's a lot of moving parts in this thing. There's his care and condition, There is his confinement, how they are putting him in solitary, basically. And this is all, court ordered as well. The judge, I have her name written down here. She ordered, Judge Megan Marshall ordered him to be sent to this maximum secure facility, this state facility. And he's on suicide watch. And that's why they're saying that they have somebody watching him by video 24 hours a day and, a guard station close by. How does this come into play when, his defense team comes to visit him, sees him like this, and we heard the statement and so forth about his confessions. Attorneys made comment about it. Gag order.
I mean, the first thing that came to mind when I saw his condition was that he was on a hunger strike. That was the first thing that struck me. And then last night when you were on your live and you commented that you thought he might have cancer, I thought, maybe there is something far more wrong than him, because he's lost about 40 pounds in about 8 months. He also does look jaundiced. People in the chat are pointing that out, and it does look like maybe he's got some kind of a liver issue. We don't know what his medical condition was going into this, but we do know that he was a husky man.
Yeah.
He was a large man, and he was not a skinny guy. He was hefty. So to see the difference, and I think you did a side by side last night of how he looked when he was arrested in October to now, is he's gaunt. I mean, it's concerning. Cruel and inhuman treatment was another thing that came to mind. Like, that's what I'd be arguing if that was my client. He's being held in a prison instead of a jail, which, as they said on that clip, is the first time anybody who's been, has not even gone to trial and been convicted yet has been held in a prison instead of the county jail, which is where people awaiting trial are usually held. Right. So I have a lot of concerns about this. He's being held in solitary for 23 hours a day in a cell that people have likened to the size of a dog kennel, which is about 12 by 8.5 feet. I guess it's a little bit of a larger, not like a dog, cage, but like a dog kennel. Like you pointed out, he's being led around by a leash, with a leash. It just looks, something's not right about this. And I don't know what's going on with these confessions, because they haven't told us anything.
Right. And I want to say the first thing, Melanie, you're right. They're tight-lipped about everything. So we're, led to just speculate on what's going on. But I want to just say this. Listen, innocent until proven guilty. We know that's what we are afforded here in the United States. Our judicial system affords innocence, and the prosecution has to prove their case. The state has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. In the interim, I want to just also say, because I took a lot of crap for this, I in no way, shape, or form, I'm not a fan of Richard Allen. I'm not a fan of anyone who's, stands allegedly accused of murdering 2 human beings. But at the end of the day, I'm a fan of humanity and treating people with respect and dignity, and being a human, and getting there's people that'll argue all day and all night that, let him, throw him down underneath the jail, throw him in a dungeon.
He hasn't been convicted of anything.
Right. So that's what we have to keep in mind here. Before we go any further, I want to say thank you to Susan Hodges for becoming a channel member. I also want to thank Heather Mast for becoming also a bronze channel member. We greatly appreciate your support. Again, I took a lot of heat because I did make mention of, like, hey, this is what anybody that's in prison, this is the treatment that they got. And here we looked at, the warden made statements that Richard Allen is being treated actually better than inmates that are sentenced and are housed there permanently. Because, as we all know, a jail is for people that are serving under like 18 months or 2 years here in New York, and it varies from state to state. But basically, short-term confinement jails, county jails will handle them. But prisons are when you get sentenced to 5, 10 years, 15 years, life sentences. there's everything from, low-level criminals serving 5-year bids to, 25 to lifers to, mass murderers there and serial killers. But Richard Allen, according to the warden, is being treated better than some of the inmates that are there and permanently housed. And in my mind right away is when I heard that, Melanie, I was like, holy shit, if he's being treated better and he looks like that,
what's going on there? Yeah.
what do these other guys look like?
Wow.
So, yeah. So, but so I wanted to get from you again, you're an experienced trial attorney, about the law, and you brought up some of the concerns that his defense team will bring up. This trial is supposed to commence short time after January 8th of 2024. They're going to start jury selection. That should take 4 or 5 days, according to them, or whatever the short time frame is. And then they're looking at a 3-week trial. How much of this will come up? His confinement for the last 6 or 7, going on 8 months, and what happens going forward to leading up to January, Mel?
I think competency is going to be a huge issue here. I think they're already drafting the papers. I mean, you look at this guy, he looks like he's completely out of it. He looks like he doesn't know what day it is. He doesn't know where he is. And listen, if you're kept in solitary confinement without human contact for 23 hours a day for 8 months, I think anybody would look like that. Right. And I think that this is going to cause a real problem with the integrity of the trial, because look what happened with Lori Vallow. She was found incompetent 3 or 4 times, I think, before her trial eventually happened. And she was not, as far as I could tell, in the condition that it appears that Richard Allen is in. In order to be competent to stand trial, you need to understand the charges against you, and you need to be able to participate in your own defense. And from the looks of him, I think the arguments are being made as we speak.
Yeah. He looks like he's like, the Night of the Living Dead, just walking around, and
the Crypt Keeper, right? Or he's on some kind of lithium or some heavy duty trazodone or some tranquilizer.
Toradol. When I heard and got confirmation that he was on suicide watch, now we know from Anthony at Tier Talk, who's going to be joining us in a short period of time, and Connie Eileen. She's, does intake at one time. She was intake at Rikers Island. She knows and has mentioned many times on this channel, once an inmate exhibits behavior of suicidal thoughts or tendencies, makes statements that they don't want to end their lives, they treat them. They treat them medically. They treat them with psychiatrists and so forth. So I'm not... I wouldn't be surprised if he's on some type of psychotropic medication, because he's been on suicide watch since after October, when he was incarcerated and put into that facility sometime after October 28th. So at the end of the day, his lethargic, movements, again, he's shackled. He's actually, his hands are like this, bound. You see him walking through those hallways. He's bound like this. It's not even like where you'd have.
It's like he's in a straitjacket.
Essentially, and we'll get into that more. But I have a little piece from News Nation. We had attorney Bob Mota. He is a defense attorney. He represented Anthony Garcia from Omaha, Nebraska. He was a serial killer. He murdered 4 people, 2 on one occasion and 2 on another in 2013 and 2008. And he had a lot to say about this. And he went live. Thank you for sharing that with me, Mel.
I just wanted to tell Maddie that, I misspoke. It was not, I did not mean trazodone. I meant something like Toradol or some really heavy duty narcotic that they give these guys to basically make them look like he's like a walking zombie.
Yeah. It was troubling for me to see that. And again, people are thinking, well, DutyRon, here's a retired detective. He's showing empathy for this guy. And listen, I show empathy for humanity. I don't think that he should be treated like a king. I think that he's incarcerated awaiting a trial. And, again, like I said, there's no need to torture somebody. He'll have a life of torture if he gets convicted. in his incarceration. And
we want him to live to see trial because we want to see the trial.
that's what I
We
said.
want him to be in a condition to participate in the trial so that we can get a conviction
Exactly.
if he's the right guy. So all of what's happening now is really going to affect the integrity of the trial, in my opinion.
Yeah, correct.
And we
And
don't want to
that's
see
the
that.
concern.
That's what we don't want to see.
All right, so let's take a listen to what Bob has to say. It's a short clip, and then we'll be back to you guys in a second.
Mentioned today's hearing focused on Allen's current mental and physical state and the motion to have him moved to another prison. Bob Mata is a defense attorney and host of the podcast Defense Diaries, and he joins us now live. Bob, thank you so much for being here. We'd like to start with the prosecutor saying that Allen had confessed to the murders of Abby and Libby 5 or 6 times. So how did the defense respond to that?
They immediately stood up and asked for a sidebar. Basically what was going on is that they had the warden of Westville Penitentiary, where he is currently being housed, on the stand. And during the course of the questioning, the prosecutor said, look, we know that he's made 5 or 6 confessions to the murders of the girls. And at that point, defense counsel Rizzi stood up and asked for a sidebar. They went up for about 3 minutes. They came back and there was no further discussion. The only other thing that was mentioned was a question that was asked by the state about letters that Richard Allen had written to the warden. So the inference, I think, may be that he confessed in writing to the warden. Now, that's a bit of inference on my part, but that was the follow-up question right after he mentioned the fact that there had been 5 to 6 confessions while in custody.
Wow. And we know you just came from the courtroom. We really appreciate this up-to-the-minute report. You got to see Richard Allen in person. Did you notice anything different about him?
He is completely emaciated. I've been in there for the last 3 appearances, and he looked like he had lost about 40 pounds. And moreover, and more disturbing, was the fact that his eyes just looked vacant. He did not look right. I fully anticipate there's going to be a challenge to his competency imminently. He looked off. Like, he walked right by me on multiple occasions, and you can just see it in his eyes. I've had a case in Omaha where I defended a man named Anthony Garcia, and it was the same look he had. And I learned after the fact that they had been tranquilizing my client every time they were bringing him into the courtroom. And this, I'm not implying that's what they're doing, but there's something off with them.
Wow. Can you give us a sense of the atmosphere? How busy was it? Were there family members inside?
Yeah, it was packed. So the right side was for the press and the media, and the left side of the courtroom was exclusively for family members, loved ones, and friends of both Libby and Abby.
So we did not get to hear about the ballistic evidence. Do we know what's next with that aspect of this case?
So the way that the judge put it, and she addressed it early on in the hearing, before we got to the issue of his current incarceration, she said that they wanted the defense to file what they call a notice of a Franks hearing. Now, a Franks hearing is where they're challenging a search warrant, saying that law enforcement lied in order to get the warrant. So she asked for that to be noticed up in order for that to move forward. So I don't know if that's going to be connected. I was obviously disappointed. I was anticipating that motion to suppress was going to go forward today. And with respect to your little piece that you had done there, I just want to point out that this was an unspent casing. This wasn't a casing that was shot through a barrel. So the tool markings, they're attacking the ballistics as it was and how it's been for the past few decades. This is even like more infrequently used, and I don't know that there's ever been a conviction based on a casing that's been ejected from the weapon and not fired through the weapon. So that's what they're going to be attacking.
I just want to stop it just for a second. I'm not going to put us on the screen, Mel. Everybody can hear us, but so in regards to what this attorney's saying, based on the lack of information that we know, again, reverting back to, we don't know if these girls were shot. And if in fact they were shot and that caliber of bullet was used in their murders, then yeah, this has a lot to do with it. But we don't know that. and
Right.
there could be a chance that it has nothing to do with it. But because everything is suppressed and the gag order and everything is being held back, we don't know the significance of that unfired cartridge. And if in fact it was the cartridge or the same type of round that was used to murder these two girls, now we have a whole different ballgame.
And that's what, we were talking about the other day on another probable cause affidavit. If these poor young girls were killed with this bullet or this caliber bullet, and I assume that if they were shot, they do have the bullets as evidence. They did recover the bodies. We have other cases where the bodies were never recovered.
Right.
Wouldn't that have been in the probable cause affidavit and not the presence of a bullet that was found at the scene that was not fired?
Yeah.
That's concerning to me. And the fact that the attorney who practices in that jurisdiction said that there's never been a conviction based on that type of evidence, based on an unfired round or bullet, that's concerning also.
Yeah. So much, again, so much to be concerned about here. And folks are, chiming away in the chat. We appreciate the live chat. Again, I just remind you guys, if you have differences of opinions, keep it civil, keep it respectful, because if you attack each other, then we unfortunately have to just take you guys out of the stream and put you guys in a timeout. I don't want to have to do that. I want you guys to be able to respectfully express your opinions here. But again, if it's not done and you come and attack anyone, including myself or Melanie, you'd be removed. I'll just ask you guys to leave, or a moderator will do some moderating. Okay, so I'm gonna end that because that's towards the end of the comments there. You shared something with me from him today that was a little bit different and talked a little bit more about his living conditions, and I want to go into that because our next guest, who's waiting patiently, Anthony Ganji from Tier Talk, you and I are going to get into care and custody with him, and we're going to ask him a lot of questions. So for those of you who are in the chat and are concerned about procedures for Richard Allen in a state facility, a maximum security facility, we have the guest for you, Anthony Ganji, who's an executive on the correction side, Tier Talk podcast. He's got an unbelievable amount of information. We're going to have him come on. But now let's get back to the law side of this thing. Again, we want to get him to January, to where we have this trial kickoff.
Yeah.
But if his health is ailing like this and he continues on this downward spiral, I don't think that he's going to be able to, as I said last night, to be mentally ready or physically ready. They were walking him like he was an invalid.
Right. And if he's found incompetent, it's going to delay the trial further. And God forbid he dies and there are co-conspirators, which I believe there are, we're never going to find out about them.
Yeah. And
because he may, eventually, if there are co-conspirators, he may start rolling over on people. Like, he hasn't yet that we know of, but let's keep him alive.
Yeah. So we can hear what his defense team has to say, or his side of the story. And we have this creep, Keegan Klein, who faced 30 counts of child porn. There's a lot of people who feel, let us know in the chat if you feel that Keegan Klein and Ron Logan, the owner of the property where the girls were found murdered, he is no longer with us either. There was a lot of people who felt he had something to do with it as well. He was the bridge guy.
Yeah. And that guy was catfishing them on some kind of social media. I don't know what, but he was interacting with them and
to handle Anthony shots. Yeah.
Could have been a way to get them to the location.
Yeah. Yep. Let's take a peek at this. This is a news report. It's short and it's about his custody, and it goes over what you talked about, Melanie, his small living conditions in the cell. So let's take a peek at this and we'll be right back. It's just a minute or so long.
Okay.
Well, tonight, we're getting more details on Richard Allen's life inside maximum security prison.
Our John Duran went over the testimony from yesterday's hearing, and he tells us why Allen is under constant surveillance.
23 hours a day, every day, Richard Allen's life is confined to an 8.5-foot by 12-foot cell, which is actually smaller than a parking space. And inside
There it is.
Oh my God.
So
Allen's cell is only a fixed bed frame with a mattress on top, a toilet, and a Bible. Also, a camera that's recording him 24 hours a day. Allen has been on suicide watch at Westville Correctional Facility since last fall. The prison's warden testified Thursday that Allen's mental health seemed to decline the last few months. Because he is on suicide watch, the Indiana Department of Corrections has stationed a prison officer outside Allen's cell around the clock. Another inmate was posted at Allen's cell door as part of the facility's companion program, but the warden said that changed once Allen's mental state declined. Allen was even monitored while speaking to his attorneys. They say prison guards videotaped those meetings, and Westville staff directed Allen to sit in a specific chair that faced a window where prison staff stationed outside the room then recorded the entire meeting through the window.
The privacy with your client is pivotal. I mean, that is the most important thing when you're preparing for trial. I mean, how can you represent someone if you can't have the confidence between one another? So, yes, it's very important, and it's something that his attorneys are rightly concerned about.
At the hearing, the judge agreed to sign a restraining order, preventing Westville Correctional Facility staffers from recording future meetings between Allen and his attorneys. In Indianapolis, John Duran, 13 News.
So that's not stopping them from recording him while he's in their custody because he's on suicide watch. So, yeah. So you talked about what this attorney you just brought up about being able to have that attorney client privilege, right?
Right.
And if you're not afforded that, then this is a violation of those rights that he's afforded and the counsel's afforded.
So if the confessions were made to his attorney, let's say, because we don't know how they were made. There's some talk of some letters to the warden. I don't think he confessed in letters to the warden. My opinion is that his letters to the warden were complaining about his treatment, complaining about the fact that he wanted to get out of there and be moved to a jail instead of a prison. That's my gut on what his letters to the warden were. I don't think he would confess to the warden. It doesn't make sense to me. If his confessions were made to another inmate, that could maybe be admissible, maybe not. If his confessions were made to his attorney, that could fall under attorney-client privilege, and they may not be admissible. But his attorney may want to use those confessions to prove that he's incompetent. So there's a lot of moving parts here.
Right.
And without knowing how or to whom those confessions were made, it's hard to really give an opinion on it.
Yeah, you're right. And Melanie, when it comes to these confessions, if they were in fact, like I said, like they're reporting on here, if Richard Allen was making these spontaneous utterances or speaking to inmates, we know that that's not admissible. That would not be admissible in court if he's talking to another inmate and it was just a conversation back and forth. But if he turns to his attorney and says, listen, I killed both these girls, this is what I did, isn't it, because I'm asking this question for people in the chat, isn't it an attorney's, aren't attorneys obligated to report to the court and say, hey, the client, no? Okay.
No.
I want to get,
if your client confesses to you that they already committed a crime, absolutely not. You are not allowed to tell anybody about that. And if you breach that privilege, you will be disbarred and you will be prosecuted. If your client comes to you and tells you that they are about to commit a crime, or that they are going to commit a murder, then yes, you have an obligation to do something about that. But absolutely not. If your client confesses to you after the fact, it's the same as if you confess to your priest after the fact. You have a confidentiality with your priest, and your priest cannot be forced to testify as to the confession.
People in the chat, if Richard Allen goes to his defense team and says, hey, I want to change my plea to guilty because I killed these two girls, and confesses, are they obligated to go to the judge and say, hey, this is what we got going on? Or no,
if he wants to change his plea to guilty, he can do that. His attorneys are not permitted under the code of professional responsibility to talk about that conversation. But procedurally, if he wants to change his plea to guilty and they reach some sort of a plea bargain or a compromise, he would have to get up in court and allocute as part of that. He'd have to admit what he did, but his attorney is under no obligation to tell anybody anything regarding those conversations.
Well, thank you for clearing that up, because I got that hundreds of times last night in the chat, and I just presented it to you. I kind of already knew what the answer to that was, but there's so many people who are misinformed, Mel, and they think that, well, if he's confessed, then why should a trial go on? If he said that he did this, then why should a trial go on? You're here, the attorney's already saying, for the record, basically their client is not of right sound mind now. These conditions.
And it sounded to me like they were agreeing that there had been some confessions made. But I also want to let you know that if he did confess to an inmate, that would be admissible. The inmate could testify. The jury, again, as the finder of fact, would get to weigh that testimony about whether or not this person is credible based on, their past and their history and what they've got to gain from, saying this. And it's an exception to the hearsay rule. An excited utterance would be an exception to the hearsay rule. So, there's a lot of moving parts here. We don't know how the confessions were made, but 100%, if he confesses to his attorney is in no way allowed to tell anyone, except the other members of the defense team, because they're all sworn to, they're all protected by attorney-client privilege as well.
Yeah. Hey, listen, we got our next guest, Anthony Ganji. He is the founder of Tier Talk. He is a great friend of Crime Time with DutyRon. He's a contributor. He's here on a professional level to give us the correction side of this. Anthony, thank you for joining us here tonight. Welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, guys? What's up, DutyRon? Hello, Melanie.
Yeah.
What's up, sorry, almost said Tier Talk. What's up, DutyRon audience? Love to see you guys.
Yes. So, Anthony, you've been listening for a little bit. I've been trying to go over this with our audience. Richard Allen in a maximum security state facility as a court order. If you could, briefly give an overview to the folks that are watching. How does this go? I mean, usually we ask Connie to roll through the intake part, but I know about all aspects of, the corrections. Can you just give the audience a little bit on this? I know you did a little research on your own.
Well, you were nice enough to send me some stuff too, so thank you. When someone comes into the system, obviously they're going to be evaluated by medical, mental health, and the determinations will be made based on what's provided to them from the person that's incarcerated, but also any other information that they deem is important, whether it's information coming from if he ever has gotten help from the outside or just stuff that they've figured. But with that said, once he went from county to state, I will tell you one thing: state is very prepared to take care of people for long term. That's why right off the bat, when they put him in solitary and all this other stuff, I understand that he's a pretrial. He's not an inmate, pretrial resident. I don't know what the terminology would be, but basically they need to protect that individual because one, he can't be mixed in with individuals who have been sentenced. But two, he's high profile, so he could easily be a target. Also, the fact that he's on constant watch, I'm surprised he's able to even have visits with the legal team, because if his mental capacity is in question enough for him to be on a constant watch 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we usually don't allow them to have visits at that time because the person's just not mentally stable to do so. So you also have a bunch of lawyers that are talking to someone who's not mentally stable. Usually they would have to wait until mental health has either dropped the watch down to maybe a close watch, maybe something every 15 minutes, or ultimately maybe clear him from the watch. I think the other concern here too is that sometimes when you have someone that you feel could be suicidal, there is a process when it comes to bringing them down off the suicide watch, which would be it would go from a constant observation. So you got someone watching him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And by the way, that inmate program, the companion program, that's just a shortcut to save money on overtime and all this other stuff. It's not a good program. So I'm glad that they kind of are not doing that in this case here. Because again, when you have someone that's high profile, all eyes are watching your practices. They're watching how the facility is upkept. Either way, when the person starts to step down, the next process is after what you'd have, let's say, a constant watch and a close watch. The next process would be, if we're going to house him, maybe we could step down and house him with somebody, but they can't do that with this case here because, housing him with somebody could pose a threat to himself. Plus, he's not a sentenced individual, so there's nowhere where they can house him. So technically right now, I think the constant observation is because they have no way to bring him down and release him. So I thought that was pretty unique that they're still doing some level of legal visits when you have someone that's mentally unstable. I've never worked in a prison. I've worked in 5 where when you have a person who's on constant watch, even if the lawyers try to visit him, or even if there's a court order, you will say at this time the person can't make it because right now they are under constant observation. We would have to wait for them to work their way out of that before they're allowed to have any type of visits or even be sent out of the facility.
Right, but we're not so sure that he's at that point at this time, because he was produced in court 2 days ago. Anthony, I want to ask you about the potentials for drugs being administered to him if he's suicidal. What does the infirmary do? This is a state facility, right? So prisoners that have mental health issues or suicidal thoughts, we know he's on suicide watch. Is he medicated? Does he have the potential to be medicated based on his evaluations through the psych?
Yeah, because you have psychiatrists who can prescribe along with psychologists. In some states they can as well, but mostly it's the psychiatrist. I believe in Indiana, they don't have a force med protocol, which means that they have to go to the courts, where in some states, I think there's like 2, my state being one of them, where if the person does not want to be medicated, we do have a panel who can then vote. Usually it's led by the administrative team, but you also have a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and together as a team, we can decide if the person should remain on a force med protocol or not. But yes, inside the system, if need be, they can medicate him. But if he chooses not to be medicated or the lawyers are fighting against that, then they would have to take it out into the court system, because Indiana does not have as I said, a force med protocol that's done with inside the facility. So at that point, they would have to go through the courts, and it would be psychotropic meds. Those are usually the medication that tends to fall under the force med protocol, because that's the medication that's utilized to calm the person down when they're going through some level of mental crisis. So it actually helps us when the person is going through a mental health crisis to be able to provide those medications just to kind of tone them down. But from my experience working in the system, I don't find that we are always going to medication, because it's also costly. So we work with our vendors to make sure that we exhaust all avenues before we start putting money towards whatever the psychotropic meds are that may be required.
Interesting. Well, Melanie and I will definitely have lots of questions for you, but I wanted to throw one that I know her and I will want answers to. What's your thoughts on how this guy has progressed from October of 2022 to Thursday when he was produced in court? You saw the clips that I was putting there, over 40-pound reduction, probably more than 40 pounds, and look is really frail. What's your thoughts on that? And how does the prison look at that? Do they monitor him? Everybody wants to know.
Well, first off, thanks for showing me that picture. That picture was definitely an extreme. Just in a matter of a couple of months, I believe he had decompensated. So I think it could also be situational. I mean, you know, there are always efforts to help somebody, but you can't force the horse to drink water. So, I mean, at the end of the day is, you know, we could be there trying to help the individual, and the individual just refuses to be helped. And I think that could be a point. I mean, if he's on suicide watch, there could be a thing where he wants to die, which means that, you know, he may be refusing the efforts from people to help him. I mean, and he could be strong-willed in that manner. I mean, as you can see, look at the picture. That's what you sent me today. I mean, to be honest with you, you could have somebody who is who is getting the help, but he just doesn't want to be on the other end of receiving it. And I know we mentioned a possible hunger strike. I don't think he's on one, because if he's on one, usually the protocol for a hunger strike is usually, it depends on the state, but for the most part, usually after you refuse 9 meals or 72 hours within, give or take, it depends on the facility or the policy. But once that it's official and the hunger strike is running and he has a defined purpose, because there has to be a defined purpose or a declaration, they usually get put in the infirmary to be monitored. So at this point here, it says he's in like a dorm or something. I don't know if he's in the infirmary. So
he's in a pod. It says he's in the A pod.
Yeah, so I couldn't find out what A pod was. I don't know if that's just a mental health unit that, so guys, just to lay it out, guys. So there's, when you work in a state facility, and hopefully some of the jails too, there's going to be different areas in which an inmate's needs could be addressed, and you could have units that are designed for that. You could have infirmaries, which are really short-term care. You could have hospitals. Some facilities do have hospitals that could handle a lot, especially for inmates that require long-term care. But then you also have mental health units, like a treatment unit, which he probably won't be a part of that, because that involves also some interactions with GP inmates. But you also have a stabilization unit, which is usually a unit that is meant for people that are mentally decompensating. And then what happens here is they put them in a stabilization unit to try to stabilize them, but it's not a long-term unit. It's a unit that's meant to, help the person go through the process, navigate through the impulses, limit their resources so they don't do anything foolish.
I don't mean to cut you off, but it appears that nothing's being done with this guy, because he looks like absolute shit.
Yeah, but you can't. Yeah, but the problem is this, though, if I may say so. We don't know if some of that is a choice that he's making, and we're very limited in how we can force somebody to take treatment or how we can force somebody to eat. We can't do that. I mean, that would be invasive. So having said that, all we can do at that point is monitor.
Feeding tube? You can't stick a feeding tube?
No, you can't do any of that. It's invasive. So what happens here is, believe it or not, it's a right to go on hunger strike. You cannot deny an inmate a right to go on hunger strike. But there's also a mental health component to that too. So having said that, the person starts deteriorating where they feel it's affecting his mental health and he can't properly make that decision, then you take the person probably to an outside hospital, and you kind of work with what you got to do to preserve the life. But in the meantime, you don't know if the guy is still, for some reason, he may not look great, but right. if his vitals are good and everything's good and he's refusing to eat, we cannot force feed him.
Yeah. So when you say that he has to declare, he has to say, I'm on a hunger strike. So if he just doesn't eat for 3 days, it's not considered a hunger strike, right? Is that what you're saying?
That's a great question, and I appreciate that. Melanie, is that okay? Can I call you Melanie?
Yeah, of course.
That's a great question. So usually for most states, it's going to be first they have to declare that they're on hunger strike, but there has to be a reason. Because it's a declaration that says I'm not eating because of these reasons. And then at that point, there's usually a certain amount of missed meals where, okay, the person's following through. And then what they'll do is they'll wind up sending them somewhere where they can be monitored for intake. Just because, again, you want to make sure that this person's not eating. Okay, if you're not eating, that's fine. From 72 hours safely, let's put the person in the infirmary and let's monitor his vitals to see where this leads. But I have seen people literally on hunger strike for years that have survived on Boost. Because you know what, and the policy is unique too at different places, because some places, once the person eats their first meal, they meet a certain amount of calories, the medical will go ahead and lift the hunger strike and put the person back to where they got to be. Or some people the person will know, like, okay, I'll only eat this amount. So let's say it's 2,400 calories. I don't know what the calories would be. I'll only eat 2,200, and then they don't eat meals for another 3 days. And then they go back and do another 2,200. So they can prolong it. It could tend to be, even though it's a right, it could tend to also be quite manipulative too. I mean, we may not know if he wants to get an image like this out to the public for some generalized pity. And one last thing, the lawyers don't want him to be in that facility anyway. So we don't know if some of the concerns that they're addressing are real concerns or if it's based on the fact that we're going to do what we can to get him out. So one little bug becomes an infestation.
Right.
You know, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Anthony. I'm going to play this clip, and I want the folks in the chat to understand that we want to answer your questions. But if there's some of the things that you answer, if you're asking questions that we've covered already, you're going to just have to go back and watch the replay or scroll back, because you could scroll back in the video and catch some of the things that we covered. But yes, they can't just force food down someone's throat. They can't insert a feeding tube unless certain conditions are met, I guess. So it's not as easy as just doing that. And I made mention of it yesterday on my live last night. But I'm glad I have Anthony here because he's the professional. If you have a question after we show this little piece, we're going to wrap the show up towards the end of this hour. We got another 10 minutes or so. Hashtag Anthony, hashtag Melanie, hashtag DutyRon. Put your questions or concerns in the chat, highlight them. If anybody sends a super chat, that's always an easier way to get the question highlighted on the screen, but it's not necessary. But again, put your questions in the chat. Let's play this little piece. This is what you sent me earlier tonight.
For years, Richard Allen is set to stand trial for the murders of 2 teenage girls, but in recent days, his health has become the center of attention. Allen's lawyers have argued that his mental and physical health has drastically deteriorated while being held in isolation lockup. They've compared his current living conditions to being akin to a prisoner of war. Allen was arrested after ballistic evidence linked him to the crime scene, where the bodies of Abby Williams and Libby German were found in Delphi, Indiana. The girls were last seen hiking in the area, the case eventually turning cold until Allen's arrest last year. Bob Mata is a defense attorney and host of the podcast Defense Diaries, and he joins us now live. Great to have you, Bob. Richard Allen being held at a state-operated prison. How unusual is that? We know defendants in other high-profile murders like Brian Koberger are sitting in jail right now.
Yeah, it's very unusual. And I mean, typically, in case our viewers don't know, jails are where pretrial detainees are typically held, which is somebody that's been arrested and they're awaiting trial. And if they couldn't bond out, they'll typically sit in jail. To send somebody to Department of Corrections or prison, which is where convicted felons go, is highly unusual. And that was obviously one of the primary thrusts of the defense argument, aside from the conditions of his cell and his personal being and his mental health, which were all brought up ad nauseum yesterday. So yeah, it's very rare. And he is the only pretrial detainee in Westville prison.
And you had an up-close look at him yesterday. You said he looked almost like he had been tranquilized. His defense team is trying to get him moved to a county jail for his mental health and well-being, but prosecutors have said Allen's treatment is humane. So is it in the best interest for this trial in the justice system to...
Did you see how he shook his head when she said his confinement is humane? I'll let it play back.
Is humane. So is it in the best interest for this trial in the justice system to move him, Bob?
I noticed those.
I think so. I think if there's any kind of question in terms of his competency leading into trial, because at the end of the day, this trial is about Abby and Libby and getting them justice and getting the families justice. And if this is the guy, then we want a fair trial. We don't want to have to do it again if it gets overturned on appeal because there was some issue with his pretrial detainment. So, I mean, if you're going to err on the side of caution, the move is to transfer him. And basically what came down yesterday in court was that Cass County Jail is more than capable of housing him. It's a jail. They have everything they need. They have a segregation unit because they're concerned, obviously, with other inmates potentially harming him due to the age and the violence that was, brought against these 2 little girls. And, that's always a concern in jail. So they have everything they need. They have the manpower and the resources, because transportation to and from the jail was another big issue in terms of him getting back and forth without seeing any harm done to him. And, I think that the judge ultimately, my gut is saying that she's going to transfer him to Cass County Jail is what I'm thinking.
Really interesting. And
Hey, I want to just put in here too, and Anthony, I see you're muted. I know you do that because you're a pro. The Cass County Jail, local jail close to the courthouse, the sheriff that runs that jail has said in a writing, and he said it to a reporter, I don't want Richard Allen in my facility. What's your thoughts on that, Anthony?
All right, so I'm going to answer first, real quick.
Answer that without skating around the question.
No. I have the answer. I just want to.
Why would you say that?
I have two things. So first off, it's not unusual for counties to pretrial inmates to go to, or pretrial detainees, whatever, to go to a state facility. We've seen that in the past. That's a practice that usually you get when the facility feels that they can't protect that individual for whatever reason, staffing concerns, money-wise, what the layout of the facility. So usually the state or another county will assist. Now, as for this guy, the reason why I'm thinking the warden said it is because Allen is going to come with some attention. You know, he's a high-profile inmate. And at that point, if you notice something too, he still balanced it out by saying, yeah, but my facility still got some security. So he wanted to make people know that he doesn't have any doubt in how his facility operates. He doesn't want people to lose a belief in that. He just doesn't want the attention, that comes with taking a high profile inmate. And as we talked about, I mean, think about this, guys. You get a high profile inmate that comes into your facility, and all of a sudden the media and everybody is looking at all your practices now. So everything from, your staffing to your maintenance, and it's crazy because, we may see it as, everyday occurrences, but all of a sudden from the people on the outside that see it for the first time, it becomes this extreme. And I think what he's doing now is he's like, yeah, I would take the guy if it's court ordered. But having said that, I really don't want the attention at my facility at this point. And it's funny because I'm sure if he was, I know some people that would probably want it, because if they're running for election, they would probably want their facility in a positive spotlight so they can boast about what they're doing. So sometimes it goes either way, but I think this guy here just doesn't want the attention at his facility.
He said that if he was ordered by the court, that he would abide by the court order. Now, I'm not, one of these perfect reading voices, but I'm going to read this. This is on WTHR, and I'll link this in the description. This was written on the 16th, which is today, if my memory's jarring me right, and it was updated at 4:29 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. During the Thursday afternoon pretrial hearing for Delphi murder defendant Richard Allen, the prosecutor and defense team debated whether Allen should remain in custody at Westville Correctional or be moved to a jail closer. The Westville prison ward testified at the hearing and for the first time provided very specific details about the cell where Allen is living and the accommodations he's offered while awaiting his January 2024 trial. The first warden, the facility warden, John Gallipew, testified on record saying Allen is living in a prison, in the prison's A-pod, which is a segregated maximum security unit with additional security within the prison. The unit houses felons who have been convicted of serious crimes such as murder and child molestation. The Delphi murders defendant is the only pretrial non-convicted inmate currently housed in the prison's maximum security unit and the only prison pretrial inmate assigned to the unit. During the 4 years that this warden has been at the prison, he's never seen this done before. Since arriving at the prison last fall, Allen has been living in a 12 by 8.5 foot cell that is equipped with a mattress on a secured bed frame, a toilet, and a Bible. Allen's cell is equipped with surveillance cameras that record his every activities 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The warden assigned Allen to be a segregated individual cell because of his high-profile nature. I hear you say that a lot, Anthony. Because of Allen's crime involving two children, places him at a very high risk of retaliation and violence from other inmates. Now, when I've asked you about that, you said that you guys do the best that you can to keep your inmates safe, right? It's the job of corrections to keep the housed inmates, whether they are temporary or permanent, safe, right? It gets
Yeah.
people. This gets people triggered when we talk about this, but that's the job.
Yeah, I think that, at this point here, first off, I think he's actually better at a state facility. I mean, because
Well, that's why the judge ordered it. The judge thought that he would get killed at a local jail because everybody knows about Abby and Libby, and all the perps and all the bad guys that are there for their small little stints and that are awaiting trials would want to get a hold of him and might have a better chance. And the sheriff who runs that Cass County jail, he even said it. He said, I don't want him here. It's going to cause me a lot of havoc.
Yeah, because remember, there's always going to be, when you work in a maximum security facility, they're used to moving inmates independently.
Right.
It's whether it's a PC inmate, because you'll even find protective custody inmates could be held at a maximum security facility because it's about holding the inmates safely. I'm going to say the word isolated, but I mean, that's technically what it is. They are separated from other individuals, so we can go ahead and either protect the rest of the GP or also protect that inmate.
Let me finish this because it's only got a couple more paragraphs. Allen is permitted to shower 3 times per week, and he is allowed 1 hour of recreation time outside of his cell 5 times per week. So not 7 days a week, only 5 out of 7. He's allowed out 1 hour. The defendant is provided 3 sets of clothing each week. He also has access to the prison commissary and has purchased socks, shoes, and shirts, according to the warden. Each inmate, including Allen, is provided an electronic table that allows him to listen to music, watch movies, and make phone calls. Those calls can be accessed and monitored by prison investigators, and we all know that they are. Unlike other inmates in the maximum security unit, Allen is permitted to have face-to-face visits with his family. When Allen is being transported from his cell to other locations within the prison, he's placed in chains, cuffs around his hands, feet, and torso, and is sometimes transported with a restraint chain. I want you to talk about that restraint chain, if you can, briefly. What the hell is that? Is that a dog chain?
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's different types of restraint chains because, to be honest with you, we put people in restraints all day. That could be handcuffs, that could be shackles, that could be the black box where you're holding them down.
Like everyone's saying, oh, that's inhumane.
No, I think what's happening here is that there's a little bit of a bias in regards to the practice that we commit at a maximum security facility, and they're making it look like it's extreme compared to what would be dealt with at the county facility. Now, having said this would be normal operations at a maximum security facility, but with that said, what they're doing is they're trying to probably push that as an extreme because at the county jail, maybe he would have more level, or they would believe he would have more levels of freedom. Now, I also want to mention something too. He's also going through this pre-trial, so there could be an effort where he wants to be seen as decompensating mentally because it could help out his case. In the long run. So, I mean,
mention that. Yeah, that's a good point, Anthony. And thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, because sorry.
You see it. You probably have seen this,
all the time. So I wanted to make note of something because there was a phenomenal question asked by one of your audience members about how mental health keeps connected. So, granted, obviously there's a lot of turnover. In my case, I have been lucky to see very consistent individuals. Like what I mean by that is they're with the profession for quite some time. But if they're not, granted, we have documentations, what we would use in medical records. And those medical records are very, very, very detailed. So if I'm not here and Ron is covering me or Melanie's covering me, we have all the information in front of us. And by the way, I want to mention another thing too. Even with the force med protocol or the recommendation to put somebody on force med, the recommendation for that will come from the treating individual, the psychiatrist who's treating the individual. But having said that, the determination does not come from the person who's treating him. It comes from the person who is supposed to be objectively removed, but they read the detailed charts. So I believe the consistency comes from the documentation that is put in the person's history. I got people that, literally.
And answer Smitty's question right there, Anthony.
I think that was the question you were referring to, right?
Yeah,
Smitty's
because
question?
the consistency really comes from the documentation that's left behind, because you got people that are going to be in the system for 40, 50, 60 years. You're not going to have the same staff throughout that duration of time. So basically, people do their job, kind of scribe on the wall what we got left, and then go and next person picks up.
Hey, I want to clarify what I was just reading. Thank you for that, Anthony. You're a wealth of information here when it comes to the correction side, care and custody. When the statement was from the last paragraph I read was from Richard Allen's defense team. They said when Allen is being transported from his cell to other locations within the prison, that means when he's brought to the room where he has his interview with his attorneys, he's placed in chains and cuffs around his hands, feet, and torso, and sometimes transported with the restraining chain, which his defense team described as a leash, similar to those used to walk a dog. Allen has been on suicide watch since last fall. The warden testified that Allen's mental health seemed to decline a few months after he arrived, when the defendant received his legal paperwork. So the warden is saying that his mental health and his suicide watch, it was increased after he received his legal paperwork. Because he's on suicide watch, the Indiana Department of Corrections has stationed a prison officer outside Allen's cell around the clock. It used to be another inmate who was posted, as we spoke about, as part of the companion program, but the warden said that changed once Allen's mental health, and we heard the reporter talk about this. Allen has written, and Melanie, this is where this comes from, has written the warden 5 or 6 letters while in prison. He did not elaborate on the topic of those letters, as you stated, but people are just maybe assuming that he confessed to the warden. But that's nowhere put out on pen and paper. He acknowledged that Allen has lost a considerable amount of weight, the warden, since arriving at Westville, but the warden says the defendant's vital signs have remained within the normal, in parentheses, normal range, and he receives almost daily checkups by the prison medical and mental health staff. Anthony,
that's why I think there's a conflict here.
Anthony,
I heard, but I think there's a conflict here, though. So, constant watch, when someone's on mental health observation, I mean, a direct constant watch, even if it's a 15-minute close observation, they're seen by medical and mental health every day throughout the day. They're not allowed the visits, or not supposed to be allowed the visits. They're mentally unstable. So I don't know if they're kind of confusing the two. I think that he is definitely in some higher level of status, but the stuff that he's being offered, the yard, all that stuff, that usually doesn't come in connection with the constant watch, nor does it come when, I mean, unless, and I doubt it because it's a state facility, unless they have a vendor that provides the mental health programming or the mental health, and they come by, a couple of times a week. But I just feel there's a conflict with them calling it a suicide watch, but then saying that he's doing all these things with the officer. And it doesn't, I feel that there's a conflict there. To me, that's not the normal operation of a suicide watch.
Yeah.
They said that he had 24/7 video on him with no audio.
Well, yeah, I saw something unique on that. So when you have, I guess, obviously because he's a high profile inmate, it could make sense to kind of put the cameras on him, especially during moving the person from A to B. But once there's a legal thing, once the person has been situated and secured in the room, usually we don't restrain the individual unless they're a threat. And if they're a threat, they would be in a non-contact setting, not in an open setting like this. And then immediately you step out, cameras are off, and you remove yourself from anywhere that dialogue where you can overhear the dialogue. So I don't understand what happened there. To me, it's common sense 101 that you don't have cameras in the room and all that other stuff. So I'm surprised. I'm thinking what happened there is there could have been a misunderstanding with policy from administration to the officers, because I can't see administration making that mistake, but I really can't see the officers making that mistake, but it could happen.
So the warden goes on, and this is the last paragraph. The warden goes on to say, Alan is receiving the same treatment as other inmates in the maximum security unit of that prison. And in some cases, he's being treated far better. I don't know.
I think that's noted as effort, though, by the way, because you can't listen. Outcome is out of our control, as I said. So maybe what they're trying to say is that they're making the effort and he's just not responding to it. So having said that, I think we cannot just focus on outcome. We have to focus. Maybe what they're noting there is effort. But again, we're not in charge of the outcome. That's on Alan. I think that they're saying that we're providing the effort. That's what we're giving a lot of, and he's just not responding to the effort.
Right. So it goes on to talk about Carroll County Jail and how they didn't want him. All the county jails this one is just 20 minutes from Delphi. And they basically said they have opposition to housing him because of the threat that he poses to himself by other inmates. So basically, I don't know. The newly elected sheriff testified Thursday that it's his concern about his department's ability to safely transport and keep custody of Alan in the Cass County Jail and the Carroll County Courthouse. And he said that the added security and manpower that would be required is far beyond their capacity. There's money, as you talked about, Anthony. You talked about money. So is this coming down to throwing it onto the state that has a bigger budget and can handle the 24-hour surveillance that he requires? It says during the pretrial hearing, when asked if Cass County is willing to accept Alan at his jail, the sheriff, Ed Schroeder, bluntly told the court, "I don't want him," due to his extra hassles and security concerns of housing an inmate of his high-profile nature. But the sheriff quickly added that his large, modern facility is well-suited to house Alan, and Schroeder said he would accept the defendant only if ordered to do so by the judge. Melanie, your thoughts on that? Holy shit.
I mean, nobody wants another Epstein on their hands, right?
Yeah.
Right? Nobody wants that, right? So I don't want him. It's like hot potato.
Yeah.
I don't want him.
It's like
get him out of here. I don't want this happening on my watch.
The county doesn't want him. They're like, oh, that. I don't want this guy.
But you know what they did, though? You saw how he justified it by saying it has nothing to do with the ability or the capabilities of the facility. He's making sure that people don't lose faith in the modern. He quickly said the word modern facility, But I think when it comes to housing an inmate like that, it's also it's money, yes, but it's also staffing availability.
They told the court, Anthony. This sheriff told the court, "I don't want him."
And I'm not shocked. I mean, a court order.
Yeah, I'm not shocked by that because, again, look at the attention it brings. And also, having said that, look, this inmate Alan, or whether pretrial detainee, whatever it is, he could be doing this on his own accord, and the inmate, the state facility is quick to blame. Now, imagine if he winds up fully decompensating and dying in the county jail, that he goes to, which I think, to be honest with you, I'm starting to believe that this is kind of like a ploy, because I think everything that has been documented, the efforts are documented. I'm sure that when maybe if records ever get released, you could see the efforts being made by staff and maybe the refusals for him to cooperate. Now, imagine if this guy goes from this state to a county jail and then kind of just done.
I want to add, because the more I'm reading this, the more my head is exploding. The sheriff, the county jail sheriff, Schroeder, also said that he would likely house Allen in an individual suicide watch padded cell that is video monitored by his jail staff. Those padded cells, it's like a white padded walled cell.
Yeah, but let me just say,
he said this in court.
Yeah, I know, but it's all based on assumptions. I mean,
any transport would not be responsibility of my department, but of the Carroll County courthouse. So he's putting the transport on the court guys.
So out of curiosity, usually a padded cell is for
Allen's
someone
moved to the jail. Both the Indiana Department of Corrections and Indiana State Police are being considered as a possible option for transport. Carroll's saying that I have staff limitations and I'm not transporting them.
Yeah, but right. So usually a padded cell is for someone who's actively in self-harm. I mean, has this guy threatened to, or has this guy tried to hang himself? Has this guy tried to bang his head on the wall, cut his wrist with something? I mean, it's just a padded cell is for someone who's actively violent. Someone that's starving himself would not be necessarily put into a padded cell. I mean, and by the way, not all facilities have padded cells. So I think that this sheriff here is automatically assuming that this person's actively hurting himself. I mean, it could be just a person's passively just not eating.
Yeah. Well, there's just so much to this. This is all on Channel 13 WTHR. I'll link it in the description so you guys can go over and read what I was just reading. And here it is, all in this humongously large worded article. It's just a chock full of information that, for me, just reading it tonight, I'm mind blown. I'm mind. I use the F word because to have a sheriff tell the court, I don't want him, and then to double down and say, if he's here, I'm putting him in a padded room, which, okay, that's fine, so he doesn't hurt himself. And then the triple on this was, I'm not transporting him. Every time you want him, you got to come get him. That would be like Nassau County Jail telling me that I'm not bringing your guy to court. You have to send a court officer and the transport team, the sheriffs from the court, to the county jail to get him and bring him to the court.
Don't you think, though, that Nassau County
they do it?
Prison is a lot more equipped to handle this type of thing than this really tiny county in Indiana.
Yeah, the cost to transport him is probably going to be heavy.
Yeah, but we're talking about one person who took 2 teenage girls' life, right?
Yeah, but remember
allegedly, right? He's standing charge. So
the transport is really
think at this thing. I mean, I don't know.
But the transport is not so much that, I mean, yeah, he could be a threat, but also there's a threat to him. So he's got to probably go out there with freaking some bulletproof vests and all these other things. So I mean, I think it's a very costly, and the amount of manpower to kind of have to be surrounded by him. And one, if I just make comments, someone mentioned a question. So DutyRon's nice enough always to send me the information, but I do approach it objectively. I'm not too familiar with a lot of the cases because, having said that, sometimes we could biasly draw our own opinion. So I kind of draw from the discussions that are here. So you're right. If there is something that I don't know, I didn't research it as much. If there's a question about a fact specifically that relates to the case, I may not be aware of that. But having said that, my thing comes from objectively working in a prison system for over 20 years. So that would be the best practices, I would believe.
So I have a question for you. Yes. In your experience, ready?
Yes, Melanie.
In your experience, if a prisoner is kept in isolation for 23 hours a day for 8 months without any human contact at all, is that something that would make a person crazy?
Yeah, but I just want to mention something, though.
Make them decompensate in some way.
It would if that's the actual practice that's being done. I mean, right now, believe it or not, that term seems to be it's used a lot. But I have never seen someone completely in the dark in isolation without human contact. I mean, even on the constant watch, there's an officer in front of him throughout all shifts. So they're definitely communicating. They're definitely talking because the officer has to interact with the individual to make sure, if the individual's good. So I've never seen anyone, as I said, isolated or in the dark. I think, to be honest with you, that's been tossed in the mix as if we're so primitive in our practices that we put people in a hole and forget about them. I don't think that's the case. I think that when we separate individuals, we separate them because one, they're concerned with the GP for whatever reason, with the general population. But on the other side, we have to work with them more one-on-one to see what's going on. So I think that when they're put in this area, they're seen by medical all day. They're seen by mental health all day, so they get more visits from staff than any other inmate in GP. So I don't think they're left in the dark with no human contact. If anything, I think it actually increases along with the professional staff.
That's what they've been reporting. So, because this guy's not convicted yet, he's not sentenced, they're saying that he's not in the hole in the dark, but that he's, in solitary in a cell with a guard outside 24/7, but that he's not talking to anybody. And that's, kind of their argument for this is why we got to get him out of there, because this is why he's
right. And that part of the practice wouldn't change at the jail level either, because the threat to him would be the general population inmate. So, so having said that, his contact is going to come from the professional staff. It's going to come from the officers. But when they say, oh, he has no human contact, well, you just said there's not you, I'm saying the article.
Right.
The article just said you had an officer there 7 days and he's being seen by medical and mental health. So there is
almost daily.
Yeah, professional contact.
And the responsibility is on the jail or the prison where he is now. He's in a prison to make sure it's on them that he doesn't get killed by one of their own inmates that are there.
Yeah.
And if he is in fact killed by one of them, it's a big deal. And listen, there's not a lot of fans of Richard Allen here, and I get it. Okay, but again, we're playing both sides of the fence here, and we are trying to talk fairly about both sides of this thing. And everybody, listen, if you had a loved one who was accused of a crime, you would want them to be afforded a humane housing. That's all we're saying here. And I'm not saying that he should be pampered or babied or anything like that. And somebody said in the comments, jail or prison is not supposed to be a nice place. No. And it never is. I always say, like when we talk about Chris Watts and all these, shitheads that get sentenced to life in prison, they're going to rot inside their cage. And one of the reporters used that wording and said, he's inside a cage, right? So when you're sentenced to extended confinement, you are being told when to eat, when to shit, when to piss, when to do this, when you could do that, when you can go out, and when you can go to read in the library. Everything is controlled by the facility you're in, and again, reporting on this is a difficult at best situation to be, because we want to cover both sides. So if you, again, brings me to the point, if you're not yet subscribed to Crime Time with DutyRon, consider giving this video a thumbs up, subscribing to us here on YouTube, and hitting also all of your notifications. You got to put it to all. Follow us on all social media platforms. One word, DutyRon. Melanie, all of her stuff is linked in the description. I think it's Instagram. Anthony, I'll have his. Give me about 10 minutes after we're done here. I will link his YouTube channel. Go over there. It's one of my suggested YouTube channels. I only have 5 people who I suggest. Joey Brooklyn's one of them. Anthony, Police Off the Cuff. Profiling Evil, and there's one more, Karen, Legal Minded Friends, Karen Cole, my good friend in the UK. She's an attorney over there. Melanie, we have to host Karen from the UK one day.
I know. We talk on Instagram all the time. Yeah,
we got to have Karen on, because she does all of my reels, and she's just a great friend. I chat with her. We have a spot of tea every once in a while, and chat it up. Listen, friends, I appreciate the engagement in the chat. A lot of you guys are cross-pollinated with Anthony's show, with Police Off the Cuff. We try to bring you all things true crime from the police and all the different trades, corrections, the attorneys, medical examiners. It brings me to my next point. On Monday evening, I'm going to have Barbara Butcher, our New York City medical examiner's chief of staff. Her book, What the Dead Know, is going to be released on the 20th, and I am going to be going to. She's going to have a book signing and a book release party. So I'm going to be hanging out with Detective Phil and Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff, and Barbara Butcher, and I'm going to get as many signed books as possible from her. I pre-ordered 10 to give away to you guys. So make sure you go over to my Amazon little thingy here that I have linked. You can go and link over to Amazon and pre-order that book. Support Barbara, support Tier Talk, support Melanie on her social platforms. These are great friends and great resources for us, because I can't bring it all to you. I know about hunting people down in the Fugitive Enforcement Division and breaking doors in and bringing people back to jail. I know about that. Anthony knows about housing and care and custody, right? Because what happens behind the walls in these facilities, you guys would not want to have to deal with these people. And I'm telling you, they're not easy to deal with. So the men and women of corrections are heroes. Those guys and girls and the civilian staff, they are doing God's work. They are keeping evil off the streets and dealing with people who we do not want to have to deal with. So I give a lot of credit to you, Anthony, and your folks in the correction field. I have a lot of respect and admiration for you guys, and I thank you for being here, Anthony.
Hey, DutyRon, can I just ask one?
I just gave
a question for closing, just for people to sit on and think, because your shows always ask good questions. One question: we're talking about the constant watch policies, right? The suicide watches. If he was really on a dedicated suicide watch, 24 hours, whatever, how is he writing notes? What is he using that wouldn't cause self-harm?
That's a good question.
So let's just food for thought there.
Warden. He supposedly wrote letters to the warden.
But he's on a suicide watch. You're giving a guy on suicide watch a pen and a pencil?
A typewriter? Well, didn't you say that they could have a table? You said they have a table.
No, he meant a tablet. They have like electronic tablets that are
electronics.
Maybe he sent them an email.
No, they could, but the funny thing about that all is that when someone's on a constant watch, I mean a literal constant watch,
right,
they're pretty much stuck to their bed. Maybe clothing, maybe a suicide gown that can't be ripped. But to have those other things, I just don't think that's a dedicated suicide watch. And I think what the person's doing, the lawyer or the team, whatever it is, they're blending it. They're blending a suicide watch and a max housing to make it look like the person is let's say, is being deprived all these things. And it's like, well, it seems like he's getting these things and he shouldn't be getting these things if he's on suicide watch. I'm very conflicted with their policy on suicide watch, because I'm used to constant observation. You get barely anything until we're able to knock down that at least down to a 15-minute watch. So I thought that was unique.
Maybe they're reporting the wrong terminology. You know, that could be it too.
Right. You're probably right.
They're not always.
I was just reading what was on that website. That was WHT something. I'm going to link it in the description. Everyone can go over and read it. But again, this is the news. They're reporting stuff, and sometimes stuff gets misreported. Here's Barbara's book for the folks and everyone asking. It's called "What the Dead Know" by Barbara Butcher, and it's coming out June 20th of 2023, which is next week. I can't wait for you guys to get a hold of it, and I thank everyone who has purchased it. Anthony, Melanie, I can't say enough. We were supposed to do an hour, and here we are, an hour and 30. The time goes by so quickly when we're talking about this stuff. We haven't covered everything that we want to cover in these shows, and I know that you guys have been throwing out a lot of great questions. Leave us questions in the comment section down below if we haven't gotten to your questions or covered your concerns. Put hashtag Melanie, hashtag Anthony. I know Anthony's like a cyborg. Look, I just buttered his bread for him, and he basically just went right to the questions. He didn't even be like, hey, thank you, DutyRon. I'm not expecting.
I said thank you.
No, but I'm just saying you're so dedicated. You went right to those questions, and I appreciate that because you're locked in. You're locked in, and that's what makes you great. So thank you, Ann. Again, we're going to be live. I'm going to do a dedicated show with Anthony and Connie. She's already agreed, and I'm so thankful to have Connie. The fathers who are out there, Sunday is Father's Day here in the United States. Happy Father's Day to all the great dads. Anthony, I know you're one of those that are doing the right thing by their families, and you know, some of the dads who you know, like my father was separated and divorced from my mom before I even knew it. Like I was a baby, you know. So my dad was like my best friend because he kept coming around after the divorce. So I can't even put my dad in that category of a, you know, not a good. He was good, a good man. Did everything. Look, there you go. Anthony puts up a lot of great posts with his daughters. So again, to all the great dads out there that are doing a great job, enjoy this Father's Day. And to all the moms who are filling in, doing dad's work, enjoy this day, because Father's Day is, you know, for all of us who are doing the dad's job. So Melanie, I don't like to do the final words with you, but do you have any thoughts to leave the audience?
I was gonna say that too, about Father's Day, to all the moms who are doing double duty.
See,
as being both parents is not always easy, but it's always worth it. Let's also remember that this case is about Libby German and Abby Williams. They were only 13 and 14 years old when this horrific thing happened to them, and it's about justice for them. And we want this guy to stay alive and to stay in a condition where he's going to be able to stand trial for these crimes, and to be able to find out if there's anybody else involved. So that's our focus here. Our focus here is not to, you know, talk about human rights for prisoners necessarily, but our focus is to get justice for Libby and Abby.
Amen to that. And I'm going to show their pictures. There's many of them here on the screen. You know, you can go and search for this case, and there's just so much stuff for these two beautiful young kids who had the day off and their lives were taken from them by you know, allegedly Richard Allen, and again, innocent until proven guilty. Anthony, I want to thank you again tremendously for being here. Everybody loves Tier Talk. Go over and subscribe to that channel. Him, Connie, Russ, and all of the, I mean, listen, Keith, we haven't had Keith back on since we did that almost 2 million view show with Keith, right? So we need to have him come back on and hang out with us, because he's a great resource, and we just got to get him the proper mic, because remember we had all those issues with the mic.
Couldn't hear him,
yeah, so we couldn't hear him, but we still did really good with that show. So on behalf of Crime Time with DutyRon and Melanie Little, I want to just say thank you to everyone for being here. Good night from New York City. Enjoy the weekend, and till next time, peace and love from Crime Time with DutyRon.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye, guys.